Okay, so let's start by welcoming everybody. So this is our second call. We had one just about 2 weeks ago, and we started talking through the 2.0 candidate features. We got probably halfway through the list, or around that anyway. So the agenda for today was to run through the rest of that. Before we get to that, just a couple of logistical things. So first of all, I have the call set to record, and we're going to post the recording somewhere. I'm not sure where, on dpdk.org or elsewhere for anybody who couldn't attend. But I thought it was only fair to warn people in advance. So if you want to, you can choose your words carefully, because things will be recorded. We had one or two questions just on the timing of the calls. We picked a time that suits Europe and the USA just initially. That obviously doesn't suit people in Asia nearly as well. So what we might look at doing is alternating the times, do one that's maybe US friendly and then one that's maybe Asia friendly, and switch back and forth between the two. I've said before, but if anybody has input on future meetings, whether that's the tool, we said we'd try GoToMeeting today. Any feedback on whether it's good or bad, indifferent, the timing of the meetings, or particularly topics for future calls, feel free to send it on to me. And we want to try and do these as more of a discussion. So we don't have a whole lot of slides. It's not intended to be a lecture or a presentation. It's intended to be more interactive than that, more question and answer, more discussion based rather than presentation. So we'll see how that goes. And the only last logistical thing is just to minimize background noise. With a whole bunch of people on the line, you can get a lot of background noise. So if people aren't talking, if they could mute, that would be good. Okay, so these are the things that we had on our candidate list for 2.0 that we didn't cover last time around. So my thinking was we could just go through them. They're not in any particular order. It's not a priority order. It's not alphabetical. It's a completely random order. But my thinking was we could talk through some of those and maybe get somebody to give a little bit of a description as to what the intent of the feature is. And then maybe we can see if people have questions or there are comments on it. So I believe Neil is online. Maybe we could start with the API versioning. Neil, is that okay?
Sure. Yeah, I'm here, and I'd be happy to start with talking about it. Although a little bit of feedback on GoToMeeting to begin with. As it turns out, GoToMeeting does not support screen sharing in Linux, so I had some slides that I don't think I'm going to be able to share today.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's useful feedback anyway.
Yeah. But that's okay. I can go through them and give sort of a high-level overhead or overview of them here, of what we're talking about with API versioning. A little bit of background. So you're all familiar with DPDK in terms of where the project is today, in that it's a fast-moving project, lots of change with a strong focus on performance, and a community that's I think for the most part reasonably in line with that. However, there's been a desire, I think, in the past six months to a year to expand the community beyond just developers of applications that solely use the DPDK. That is to say, there's been a desire to see it get pushed into Linux distributions for use by downstream consumers through those distributions. That presents a new set of challenges for the DPDK, mostly with that channelized use. Is that users of packages that get put together through a distribution expect their applications that they write through those packages that are distributed to work across multiple versions, which I think has been something that has been, set aside, because there's an assumption that you can always rebuild the DPDK for your application and fix it up then, which is not something that's conducive to a distribution package. To help mitigate that, I suppose I should also stop here and note that as a matter of policy, most distributions will only distribute a library package like the DPDK in shared object form, and that's for security purposes. and update purposes so that applications using it can take advantage of any sort of security or feature updates that come along in the future without having to rebuild their applications. So to that end, there's some requirements that the DPDK has to adhere to, and that specifically is ABI versioning. And I'll sort of split the thought here that I'm not advocating for ABI stability or that we should take a single ABI and go with it for the rest of forever. More to the point here, I'm advocating for a versioning of the ABI using GCC and other compiler tools to attach a version to every exported symbol so that applications that are built with a certain version will continue to run using those versions of the symbol while we enhance, update, and modify symbols in the DPDK going forward. And that'll provide a modicum of backwards compatibility. That, of course, leads to any number of both advantages and concerns that I'm sure everybody has with ABI versioning. In terms of strength, this offers a lot of backwards compatibility, so downstream consumers through packages can have their expectations met, and that if I build with version 1.7 of the DPDK, version 1.8 will still function, as 1.71 did. Security updates are automatic. There's also a nicety in versioning in that your API definition is explicit in that you have to have a separate file that explicitly lists which symbols are exported from the library. It doesn't allow for the possibility of accidental API creation. That is, if you forget to mark a function as static and somebody gets hold of it, it's possible that they might use it without your knowledge. And this, on the whole, enables a larger developer base. There are, of course, concerns as well, in that it does require additional developer work when updating patches or adding features or fixing bugs, in that when or if you need to change the ABI as it's been exported, you can't simply do so. There's a requirement that you need to maintain that one and add a new one with a new version that integrates with the old one so that they can both interoperate, so that newer applications that are compiled can use the newer versions while the older versions can still continue to use the older version of the symbol. That does mean performance may suffer for older ABI versions. Typically, with careful development, that can be mitigated, or at least it can be relegated to older applications, so that you can assert that, well, just rebuild with the newer version and you'll be fine. But of course, that's something to take into consideration. I guess I'll stop there. Are there any questions or discussions? I know that was sort of a mouthful.
Hi, Neil, it's Thomas.
Hey, Thomas.
Yeah, hi. So I think we have to distinguish two issues. First, I would like to sum up the current situation. Currently, an application developer has two choices. He can keep the same version, or he can upgrade and adapt his code. I think you agree. And you are raising an issue. When you upgrade DPDK in a distribution, the application will fail, but it's not easy to understand because there is no numbering in the library, right?
So, I'm sorry, go on.
Yeah, and so I agree we need to number the library. Then it will fail when loading the library. Then, for me, the other issue is about the maintenance of the old API. And on this topic, we should agree this maintenance is an overhead. And my concern is that when developing a new feature and potentially breaking the API, developers would have to duplicate code paths when they update the API. So I really think it's an overhead. And DPDK evolves very quickly, so I really prefer focusing on head development. That said, probably it's a need to have some maintenance of the API, to have some stable API. So what I suggest is to have a dedicated tree for maintenance, and in this tree you could maintain the old API.
All right, so I'll address both of those separately. First, I'll repeat your question or your statement here, and you can correct me if I misheard it. First, your suggestion for distributions is to version the libraries when distributing them so that older applications simply use the older version of the library and avoid breakage that way. Is that correct?
Could you repeat?
Of course. So if I understood your first assertion correctly, your suggestion for distributions in a way to handle API differentiation moving forward is for distributions to version the library files themselves so that applications linked against those library files will simply use them, and updated versions will have new versions and can effectively be installed side by side. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually, I was sticking to a more simple case where you are upgrading your DPDK, and so you would like to see the library file name to change with an upgraded numbering. But that's true. So, it's another issue. We have to handle the maybe we have to handle multiple DPDK on a system. No, okay.
So in answer to that, the short answer to your question, I guess to use a colloquialism, is the answer is yes with a but. And to expand on that, yes, we could absolutely do that. However, while that does address the needs of the downstream end users through a distribution, it does not address the needs of the distribution itself. That is to say, if I package DPDK 1.7 and distribute it with library versions that are appended with the 1.7 version string in the files themselves, and then applications link against that, that's all well and good. However, if DPDK 1.8 comes along and I package that and distribute it, it leaves effectively anybody that's linked against DPDK 1.7 out in the cold for anything relating to bug fixes or feature enhancements. And we're right back to where we started, where we were just telling application developers through the distribution, yeah, if you want new features, you have to rebuild, and that is not their expectation. Their expectation is that because I've got a shared library, all I need to do is pull in the newer version of the shared library, and I get all the new features from it. So that's why we're not going that route, or that's why we're not advocating for that route, because it's really just a way to avoid breakage. It doesn't fulfill the needs of the distribution or the end user's expectations. Now, to your other assertion, and I'll repeat it, and again, please tell me if I'm off base here or not. Well, in fact, now, could you repeat your second assertion, because I'm not sure I fully understood it to begin with.
Excuse me. About the first point, if I understand well, we are speaking about maintenance of a stable version of DPDK, which is not done currently.
Yes.
For example,
okay,
we speak about security patches, right?
Yes. Your assertion was that you would rather concentrate on head development and not worry about stable API preservation. Is that right?
Okay. You want I repeat the second point?
Okay.
So the second point was about maintaining the API. My point is that keeping the API in the main tree is an overhead for developers. You know, when we are changing the API, bringing a new feature, we don't really want to care how the old code path should be maintained and duplicate code path.
Okay, so you're right. You're absolutely correct. That's the state of affairs today, in that you want to be able to make changes without worrying about older built applications. And that's true. However, I'm asserting that to to deliver the DPDK to a wider set of developers and expand the community, you need to care. Now, to expand on that, and this is something I hadn't mentioned yet, I'd like to make clear that I'm not advocating for maintaining an ABI in perpetuity. That is to say, once you've exported a symbol, I'm not trying to say that we have to have it forever and ever and ever. I am trying to say that in order to meet expectations for end users, you have to have it long enough for them to recognize that they need to make a change in their application before they're caught off guard with that change. To that end, in the patch that I proposed upstream a few months ago, I advocated for the notion of a deprecation schedule whereby you could enter deprecation entries into a file so that distributions could recognize that certain things were going to go away and inform their downstream consumers of the need to change before they simply had a change in front of them. And I think the initial policy that I proposed was a one-release ABI stability. That is to say, you publish an ABI in version 1.7 and you decide that you want to change it. When you release version 1.8, you publish a deprecation notice of the symbols that you want to remove or change, and then in version 1.9, they're actually gone. And so in that way, you don't have to care about something forever. You just have to care about it for a while.
Okay, Neil, but one day or another, the API has to be deprecated. So what is the rule, what is the limit for the deprecation schedule?
Well, I don't know that there is a limit. I think what I proposed was a happy medium. What you're really asking is how much time do distributions need to disseminate information to their customers, and how much time are you willing to spend to give them that? I think the answer to the first question is it depends on the distribution. I think for Fedora, the one I'm most familiar with, one version is probably about the minimum. For others, that might be more or less, I'm not sure. In answer to your second question, I think that's probably something for the community to decide here. Maybe not necessarily on this call, but on the mailing list to determine, A, whether or not ABI versioning is something that they're willing to undergo so as to reach a larger community, and if they are, how much are they willing how much work are they willing to put in to maintain old ABIs given how much change there is? And I don't know what the answer is to that. I think that's why we're talking about it here today.
Okay. I'm thinking about the Linux model, and in this model there is a tree for a main repository for the head, and there are some other tree to stabilize the version. And I really think that it should be the concern of the main tree to have schedule for deprecation, to maintain code path, and so on. I'd really like to have another tree for this maintenance.
So let's talk about the Linux model. I think that's an excellent idea. When we talk about the Linux model, we really have to talk about two facets to the Linux kernel API. There is one facet, which is to say there are internal APIs for things like drivers and subsystems that the core exports. Those APIs are by definition unstable, and yes, they can change at a moment's notice. And that is the case because, excuse me, there's an expectation that open source drivers will be added to the tree so that when those API changes are made, the author of that change will also update every driver in the tree. For drivers outside the tree, they are, so to speak, in the cold and are left to keep up with those changes on their own, and that's by design. The other facet to the Linux ABI, which I believe the DPDK more closely maps to, is the user space ABI. That is the set of functions, system calls, proc files, syscontrol files, and what have you, that get exported that user applications can use. That ABI exists in perpetuity. Linux does not allow any changes there without a really, really good reason. And I can count on one hand the number of times I can recall that's happening. And that's the sort of stability, well, not to that degree, but you see how that degree is possible. But that's why I'm advocating for this, because user space applications require that stable API.
Actually, I was speaking to the internal API. And
Okay,
yeah,
and I understand that, but I don't believe the DPDK is representative of that internal API, because not everybody's application is part of your tree. So when you make a change to the API, you can't make that corresponding change to all the applications that use it. You have no idea what they are.
yeah, so, sorry, I'm thinking. And what about providing a glue for API stabilization?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I didn't make that all out.
Yeah. Actually, my thought is that having to maintain this API is a project by its own.
A project on its own. I'm not sure how API maintenance can be a project on its own. I mean, how would you envision something like that working?
I don't know, maybe some other people could have something to, some ideas or some proposition.
I mean, possibly. I'm not sure where those people would come from. I mean, typically, you know, a project, I guess this all comes down to, do you want to reach this wider community through distributions? If you do, this is a necessary step. I understand the desire to move this piece of it to another group so that you don't have to worry about it, but I don't really see that as a workable solution, because it assumes that there is a workforce present to do that work that simply doesn't exist here right now. I mean, if you could find people to do it, that would be great. But such as it is, this is the development community that's available. Now, you know, the other option, of course, is if it's not worth reaching that that additional set of potential community developers or end users through distributions, then that's that, and that's a fine decision to make. But that's really what we're debating here. I mean, if you want to reach them, this is a necessary thing that must happen so that people can feel confident in building applications that won't break every time they get an update from their distribution. And that's probably something to discuss further on the list. That sounds like something that we all want, you know, written down and sort of recordable, that we can go over more in detail.
I think it makes sense.
Some other point.
I'm sorry, who was that?
No, go ahead, Thomas.
Okay.
Sorry, Thomas, go on.
Yeah. It's really probable that developers submit patch set which is really good, but which breaks the API without providing the stability. So it will be a hard stop for the release, right? This thing is really difficult to manage. That's why I really prefer to focus the head development for the main tree and make a regular release. By the way, we have a new model for releases, starting with 2.0. And then it could be managed in another tree. And you know, there is another difficulty with the main tree. We have to test all the new features, and I think it could be difficult to test the API stabilization. Again, it's another way for validation.
So let me address that in parts. First of all, your assertion that doing this is difficult. I won't lie. Yeah, it's difficult. It's not the easiest thing in the world, and to take it a step farther, it is somewhat removed from the project's current goals, which is to say maximize performance. It's an additional bit of work to do. I don't want to be unclear or subtle or sidestep that issue. Yeah, it's extra work, and it's not easy. That said, it's common. Lots of projects already do this. libnuma, glibc, libnetlink, I know already all version their symbols so that they can maintain ABI. It's not an unheard of thing. In fact, it's quite a common thing. So to that end, to say we shouldn't do it because it's hard, I think is well accurate. Probably not a very strong argument for not doing it. I think we really need to talk about this in terms of whether or not it's important to reach additional developers and end users through distribution as a reason for doing this. If that's a valid reason, then hard or not, we should look at doing it. If it's not worth reaching those developers, then we don't need to talk about it anymore. But one does come with the other. As for moving this to a separate project, I really don't see how that's a workable solution right now. It strikes me as I don't want to say it's an excuse, but it's a way to avoid having to do it and just put it on somebody else's plate, and that somebody else doesn't exist. If there is somebody else that is willing to take on that work, or a group of people, so be it. That'd be great, but I don't know who they are. Right now, if this is going to be done, the group of people that's going to do it is on this call and on the DPDK development list. And if it's just not something that wants to get done or that there's consensus on doing, then it won't happen. I mean, in the end, this is something that we have to decide to do, and if we want to do it.
Not sure I understand all you said, but the main problem today in the DPDK development is that we need more maintainers and more reviewers. By the way, thank you, Neil, for all the review you do.
Of course.
And starting with the 2.0 release, we are trying a new model by opening some subtrees with maintainers for these arrays. And really for the maintenance, I think we have to identify some people to help. But I really prefer to split the work in different trees. Another thing to say, as you have maybe seen on the website, there is now another roadmap, and having version numbering is written in the roadmap for 2.0. So it's perfectly agreed. Now we just have to discuss about maintenance. Maybe we could continue the discussion later.
Okay. Well, let me ask you a quick question first, because maybe I'm unclear on what your proposal was there. When you say move the work to a separate tree, do you envision workflow in that sense to be done in a separate tree and then be merged perhaps via a pull request to your main tree?
So could you repeat?
I'm sorry. I'm asking a question about, when you say moving ABI versioning as a work item to a separate tree, do you envision that separate tree to be effectively a subsystem, like you cite a parallel example like the NetNext tree, where Dave Miller will collect patches and then send them to Linus for incorporation. Do you envision an ABI versioning tree to be separate from your main tree and then get pulled in via a pull request when a release is imminent? Or do you envision it as being completely separate on a separate release schedule?
Actually, I agree to integrate versioning in the main tree.
Okay.
We just have to upgrade version numbers. But about maintenance of the old code path, I'm not sure currently. Maybe we can start with a separate tree and see how the override is.
Okay. So in terms of maintaining a separate tree, I have absolutely no issue with that. That's a workflow detail, and I think would work perfectly fine. As for maintenance of the old code paths, I'm less sure about that. I'm really concerned about, given the current size of the DPDK community, I really worry that moving it off to a separate tree is going to put the work of doing that in the hands of an even smaller number of people. But yes, that's probably a discussion to have on list later. Let me also address for a moment testing in terms of versioned ABIs. I'm not sure that, given your current test methodology, which is great, I'm not sure that older versions need that level of testing rigor. Commonly, for this sort of model, I think it's left in the hands of the developers to do a reasonable amount of testing when updating the ABI, and then in the hands of end users to report problems with that, so people in distributions can maintain fixes and send patches. And in that way, you're going to grow the community as well, because you're going to get distribution maintainers involved in fixing. But that's just a comment to what you mentioned about that.
I agree we have to continue at the list because this decision involves everyone. The developers would have to do more work when breaking the API, and testers would have more work. And maybe Tim could speak about testing and validation on the Intel side.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't really thought about test impacts to the versioning. But if we could get away with a lighter testing model for older versions, that would obviously be preferable. But that's something we'll need to look at in more detail. So we don't have a good answer on that yet.
I would assert, and any testing that you can do on the older versions would always be appreciated. But I would assert, given that this is a community project, that if you can put out versioned APIs like this, that downstream users, both through distributions and generally in the community, can build, I bet you're going to get a lot of bug reports, and a lot of the community is going to be able to do a lot of that testing for you.
Right.
And of course, it won't be as rigorous as you're used to, but it will be functional testing that addresses the area of code that your end users are using.
Right.
This is Bruce here. I'm just on this. I think the idea of versioning and tracking APIs is very good, and I just, with the current pace of DPDK development, I would just say that I can't see a huge amount of API churn happening anyway. So I would hope with each release that we would only have at most a handful of APIs or ABIs that would have changed to make the testing overhead that great, especially if we're looking at a deprecation cycle as you propose of only one release. It means that our number of APIs that actually need to be tested for an old version and new version is going to be pretty small.
Agreed.
So just
in
make
fact,
that
I think when I first proposed this, I took a look through the Git change history, and there's a huge number of commits, but the number of commits that actually affected symbols that were exported was relatively small. Now, it was by no means zero, and there was still a significant number, but it was nobody's completely changing how the DPDK works every release. I mean, this last release, Bruce had a major change in the mbuff structure, which changed how a whole bunch of macros worked and how a whole bunch of symbols worked. and what was exported and what have you. But that was really sort of an outlier. You know, the prior 2 or 3 versions had almost no changes to the exported interfaces.
Yes, I would agree with that assessment.
Right.
Previously, I know from the Intel side in our release notes, we tended to document 1, maybe 2 APIs that had changed. Now, from an API rather than an ABI point of view, but from the API side anyway, it was about 1 to 2 functions per release that we were documenting as having changed that customers need to be aware of. So again, it's not significant. I'd also just note, I think I'd probably share your concerns about separate repositories for tracking older API or ABIs. I'd find it hard to see if that would work, but as you suggest, we can discuss that on list.
Yeah,
later
I think
on.
that's probably a workflow issue for Thomas and whomever else wants to maintain it to work out. But we can certainly
Again, if the scope is small, the issues become less important.
Agreed.
So what are the next steps to progressing this? Does somebody need to document a proposal on the deprecation schedule, how many old release versions we maintain, things like that, and distribute it on the list for discussion?
So I've got a patch that was on the list that's sort of been backburnered. I'm sorry, did I scare somebody? Sorry, I heard a scream there. I had a proposal on the list that got backburnered, which incorporated the currently being discussed 1 release deprecation schedule. My personal intention was, as we rolled through release 1.9 and began work on 2.0, I would repropose that patch after a rework to incorporate the new symbols that have been introduced or changed in the interim since that patch was originally posted, at which point we could discuss this further if that's agreeable to everybody. Okay.
That sounds good to me anyway.
Okay.
Okay, that's good. Thanks, Neil. Unless anybody else has any questions or comments on that.
You.
Okay, it sounds like everybody's had enough of versioning. So maybe we'll talk about, yeah, I'm sure. Maybe we'll talk about UIO PCI generic. I think we have Danny online. So maybe Danny, you can give a quick summary of the background.
Okay. So basically, DPDK is a set of use-based packet processing library where it still has a tiny kernel module, IGB and UIO, with a GPL license header. So basically, it's IGB UIO kernel module ties to in-kernel UIO module to allow write use-based driver. Basically, it does 2 things. First is to map NIC device I/O memory space use space. The second is to support device interrupt notification mechanism. Allows use-based driver application is notified when device interrupt, like link state interrupt is triggered. So the kernel module IGB UIO is very DPDK specific, so it is not upstreamable to kernel.org, which cause DPDK cannot be packaged in mainstream Linux distribution like Red Hat Linux. So actually, majority of code in IGB UIO are device agnostic. We already have a existing in kernel module UIO PCI generic, which does pretty much same thing as what IGB UIO does. So 1 month ago, I submit a RFC patch to that patch contains support of the UIO PCI generic. With this patch, we can remove the dependency on this IGB UIO tiny kernel module. But at the moment, there is no commands received so far, and but according to my performance, according to my test, there comparing to IGB UIO, there is no performance difference and the feature difference with this UIO PCI generic support. So the idea is that maybe we can adopt this RFC patch and to deprecate the IGBUL kernel driver, so make DPDK is completely in user space. Oh, by the way, there is another DPDK kernel module called RTKNI.KL. So hopefully with the bifurcated driver, we can use the bifurcated driver solution. You know, I talked about it in the company call 2 weeks ago. So we can use that bifurcated driver to remove dependency on KNI. So with this UIL PCI generator support and bifurcated driver, we can probably you know, make DPDK completely in user space without any source code with GPL as a header. So so this way we can core DPDK purely in user space. That's the idea. Okay. So any feedback and any comments on that?
Danny, this is Bruce. Just to say, I did actually reply with some comments on your patch on the mailing list, but it works really well right now. I tested it out as well, and yeah, it looks really nice running DPDK, same performance, using just in-tree kernel modules. So it was great to see this. And the comments I said were mostly just stylistic code cleanup rather than functionality.
Yeah, and
yes.
So, Danny, Bruce, should we keep really the old one, or why not just removing it for forever?
There's a gap in functionality that we've yet to close with the UIO PCI generic. I think Danny actually touched on this in his mail in terms of creating VS. So, Danny, do you want to say a bit more about it?
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, in the UIO PCI generic, by the way, this is kind of what is introduced since 2.6.32. At that moment, the SRE support is not available or support is very limited. So there is a important function, PCIe function, you know, in its kernel called PCIe underscore enable SRV. This function is not called in UIO PCI generic. Basically, this function can enable creating several virtual functions. So IGBUIO, that's called it. So IGBUIO can create multiple virtual SRV virtual functions by using the IGBUIO, but UIO PCI generic has not support. So it means we cannot use DPDK to create multiple SRV virtual functions with the UIO PCI generic. That is the only limitation. Somebody actually lots of people want to use just IXDBE kernel driver to create virtual functions. So, but anyway, because the UIO PCI generic does not support this function, so I talked with Bruce before. We may keep two solutions in DPDK. Instead of deprecate the IGBUIO, but for the company like Red Hat or other Linux distribution vendors, they can choose to use UIO PCI generic. Okay.
Yeah, basically the gap is for the use case where somebody wants to use DPDK on the host using the physical function, and at the same time have DPDK in use in a guest operating system with a virtual function. So that is the use case that wouldn't be supported by any of the kernel drivers we have just now. They don't allow that physical function in use on the host while still having virtual functions created and in use on the guest. So for that, we still would need IGBUIO, unless we can find a workaround for that also. But we're getting near to the point where it's almost obsolete at this stage. In fact, I suggested in my reply to Danny's patch that we should probably update our documentation. When UIO PCI generic support goes in, we should update the Getting Started guide to actually use UIO PCI generic in place of IGBUIO, so that the default path for the majority of users is using that standard kernel module rather than the custom DPDK kernel module.
Yeah, great. That it has to become the legacy solution. Okay.
Yeah, and we just keep the other kernel module for that edge case that we don't currently support. I think later kernels, Danny found that you can actually, it does work with kernel 3.8 onwards. You can actually use PCI generic to create your VFs. So we're only really looking at a gap for that use case for kernels pre 3.8. So it's a narrow gap now.
Yeah. Or alternative solution is that user can backport, UL PCI generic by maybe just adding 10 lines of code to port the PCI enable SRV. Then it should also work. Yeah.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Thanks, Danny.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Danny? Okay. Thanks, Danny.
Yep.
Okay, so next on the list is the integrated QEMU user space vhost. A bit of a mouthful. I think either Huawei, if he's on, or Hijing could probably talk to this.
Hi, this is Huawei.
Go ahead, Huawei.
Hello, could you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. Okay, let me firstly simply tell the background. So in the DPDK release 1.7, we have DPDK US-based vhost. It is based on the US-based character device driver. So the vRIN information are passed to US-based vhost, the character device driver. And with this mechanism, we use kernel module because the event FD, the kick FD, and the call FD are passed from QEMU process. So we need a kernel module to install a new FD in the target DPDK process. Now, now we start from the QEMU 2.1. It supports US-based, officially supports US-based vhost. The vRIN information are passed to a Unix local domain socket. So with this Unix domain socket, the event FD is automatically installed in the target server process. So we could remove the kernel module. Okay, the status now is both Tetsuya and me, we both sent the RFC patch, and we also had some technical discussions in the mailing list. From my point of view, there is no outstanding issues. For example, for the new QEMU US-based vhost, we don't have official message to tell us whether what our device is active or is not active for processing. But based on current QEMU implementation, we could find an alternative message. There is another small issue is that, for example, when one DPDK application crashes and we start the vhost may still using its memory. And if we start a new DPDK application, and it will possible crash that application. There's no perfect solution for this issue. But the workaround is if DPDK application crashes, we could bound the volatile device to back to the volatile PCI driver. And this doesn't fully solve this issue, but this eliminates the possibility. Okay. So one question is our collaboration model with Tetsuya.
Yeah, I know he was hoping to make the call. It's very late in the day, his time. He obviously didn't. if we do set up a call in a more Asia-friendly time next time around, then hopefully we'll be able to make that, and maybe we can talk to him about collaboration on that then.
And Tim, another question of the BL of the contribution. What about the consumers of that user VOS? Right now it was OVDK, but yesterday it was announced that OVDK will not be supported anymore. The project needs to be in a dead end. So what about the consumers of these APIs? I mean, what's next if there is no OVDK?
Sorry, could you repeat the question? What?
Yeah, I think the question is what.
Until now, the consumer.
The question is, what's the future of the OBDK, the accelerated DPDK virtual switch?
Well, so I think that part is clear. So, I mean, that is winding down. I think the question more is what other use cases are there for user space vhost except for OVDK?
Yeah, so a lot of the effort is actually going to be turned more towards the openvswitch.org side of the space. There still will be some learnings from what was called the OBDK or accelerated DPDK utilized. Some of the customers that are utilizing it, they can still utilize it. It's just not going to be taken forward, and those customers are going to be informed. And I guess maybe some of the messaging came out yesterday since you're mentioning it.
Okay, and so then when could we start having consumers that have been following the OpenVSwitch mainly, the user on one, but right now I don't think there is a vport using it.
I missed that, sorry. I didn't hear it.
Well, on the openvswitch.org contribution, there is currently no patch, no contributions to use the user space via with openvswitch.org. Or maybe I've nothing, but I think that was the patches till last week when I was checking the patches.
So, is your question that how is some of that material going to be moved into or utilized for the OSV, the openvswitch.org?
Yeah, because we need a consumer of this API.
Yeah, so that's still under discussion. So, I mean, one of the obvious issues here is to be working with Nigeria and some of the parties involved with this and determine what will be moved over, what's advantageous. I think some of the work we previously saw that some of the engineers were involved in, they were very specific. They wanted to take those items that would be the most beneficial and produce the best performance. And I think over time they will see the benefit of more and more of these pieces that go into it, but there is a bit of a slow rate here to adopt some of these. And I think it's basically showing the proof point, showing the performance, showing how we can add in that additional value in order to get it accepted. I will say there is a lot more dialogue that is going on in this side now. Now that the OBDK or accelerated DPDK vSwitch has basically not going to progress any further. So there is now more momentum to look towards the other side of it, to the obs.org.
Okay, any other questions for Huawei? Okay. I guess we're pretty much out of time. I think we've 2 minutes to go. So that's probably a good place to stop for today. It was a good discussion, a bit more interactive than last time, which was good. And we'll probably look to set up a follow-up in about 2 weeks' time. So thanks everybody for attending, and like I said, hopefully we'll set up a follow-up the week after next.
Thanks, Tim.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Thank you.